Yep, I will ask him about that.
Hey Dan, it's Keith. I'm gonna have you on the cell phone so that we can hear you. If we have, we've been getting a little bit of feedback, so you can listen through the Zoom, but if you wanna ask any questions, let's do it via the cell phone. All right. Yes, yeah, I'll just leave my phone on. Okay, sounds good.
About a 10-second delay between here and there.
Okay. So, yeah, okay, you're recording. Have you done YouTube yet? Okay. Well, I apologize, commissioners.
Okay.
We're good.
This Princeton Public Utilities work session on the 7th of December, 1:05, call the meeting to order. Kathy, you take a look around, make sure you've got all the names down. First item on the agenda, of course, as per usual, is the approval of the agenda. It's kind of short. We're going to have a presentation by DGR on our electric system study. Any additions, corrections, or comments we want to add here?
I would make a motion to approve.
Motion has been made to approve. Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is carried. Thank you. At this point, I will turn the floor over to the folks from TGR. Coop,
If I could just say a couple of words. real quick.
please.
So not to steal your thunder, Andy, but so I just wanted to kind of recap. You know, we've been going down this long process of making sure that the system is robust and reliable for not just our current customers, but for customers in the future. And one of the things we've been doing in the beginning was we have really focused on the financials. The second step, which the commission had approved at the end of last year, was to conduct a very intensive and very detailed system study of the electrical system, because it's important that we maintain that and provide a high quality of power to our customers. That obviously takes a lot more engineering smarts than what we have internally, so we commissioned DGR to conduct that study. And part of what the goal is to take a look at our system, because as load shades change, as customers come on and customers go off, with the way electricity acts, it can influence other customers. We always want to make sure that we're maintaining a clean power to everybody. And then just naturally with how our industry works, equipment does get to the end of its useful life. And when there are large capital investments that need to be made, such as transformers and things like that, we want to make sure that we're maintaining our voltages, maintaining the amps where they should be, so that all of our customers are continuing served. And then make sure that the system is able to accommodate new growth that might come in the future. Again, DGR has a lot of smart engineers, a lot of smart people on their staff. They do this all the time for a lot of other municipal utility members. So I really value their expertise in this. Andy's been great to work with, and he's worked very closely with Jeremy and myself over the last year, taking a look at our system, making sure that we understand and get the metrics and the measurements that he needs to ensure that the system operates properly. So I thought it was a great process. I've been very pleased with the results. I felt that they've been very thorough. He obviously is the expert on this, which is why he's presenting it. And what we're going to be presenting today is, because this is a work study and we don't make motions or make decisions, this is to give the background and kind of the introduction really for this long-term plan for our system. So it's to give it to the commission. If you have questions, just as we're going through, I'm sure Andy would be happy to answer those. But it also meant for you guys to take the reports back, digest it, take your time, make sure you understand it, and we will continue this discussion going forward. This is not a one meeting and done. type activity. This is a very complex issue. So I just wanted to kind of set that up and then, yeah, hand it over to Andy and have him go through the results.
Thank you for the kind words. There's a lot of folks other than me back at our office that have made this happen, and just so I get to come out and be the one on camera, I guess. But thanks to Keith and Jeremy and Jim, the rest of the staff, for helping us pull together the data that we needed and giving us the input that we needed to kind of finish up the study here. So as Keith mentioned, we're here to.
You want me to hand these out?
You can wait till after.
Okay,
It's fine.
all right.
So we're here to essentially recap our electric system study and capital improvements plan for your electric utility. My name is Andy Koob. I'm a project manager with DGR Engineering out of our Rock Rapids, Iowa office, just across the border from Minnesota. I graduated from South Dakota State in 2002. It will actually be 18 years for me at DGR come February of this year. So time flies fast. What were our tasks with this study? So we were doing a system evaluation and planning study that really looked at your internal system, and that consists of 4 items. So we have the 69 kV transmission system, the power that comes into town. That's actually owned by GRE and SIPA. So Princeton does not have any direct ownership of those transmission utilities. We also have 3 substations, and we'll get into those here in a little bit. We looked at your 12.47 kV and 4.16 kV distribution system. Those are the wires that are overhead and are underground that goes to your transformers that serve your house and other businesses in town. And we also looked at the power plant, but we really only looked at the power plant from a generation capacity level. Power plant is a whole other animal in itself that staff can attest to. A full study of that is probably left to another day, but we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get going here. So we wanted to analyze your system under both existing and any proposed system loads. So typical utility practice is to plan around your peak day. That's normal processes where your system has to be able to serve your customers reliably on the hottest day of the year, generally when loads are highest. So we looked at your existing loads here in 2021, and looked out to 2031, so it covers a full 10-year period. So our goals, we wanted to identify deficiencies, and that's really the biggest thing that we do. We identify deficiencies on your system, but then we come up with the solutions to remedy those deficiencies. We also provide some cost estimates here for fiscal planning that you as commission members and Keith as GM will want to look at for over the next 10 years for how to pay for those projects. One more thing I will add about our tasks is that, unfortunately, it's not my job to sugarcoat things, right? It's really a technical analysis. So what we put into it is what we get out of it. There's not a whole lot of massaging that we can do, if you will, to skew any results, if you will. So your existing system, the 69 kV transmission system, there's 2 feeds into town. There is the north feed, which really runs east-west up by the north substation on the north edge of town. That entire line is around 23 miles long. That just serves the north substation on your system. That line is owned by GRE, and it is operated closed loop. And what that means is that power can flow in either direction on any day, and it can be energized from both ways. There's also the south feed. That is a SIPA-owned line, and it's about 2.77 miles long. That line is what we consider a radial line. So it taps off of GRE's existing line, comes in 2.77 miles through town, through the south edge of town, and it stops at the power plant. So for your facilities, the south line feeds the south substation and the power plant substation, terminates right up here. We have 3 substations that are PPU owned. The first one is the north substation that has 2 what we would call substation power transformers with a top end rating of 7 MVA. That MVA rating is a capacity rating. So that's how much power you can have flow through that transformer without exceeding its rating. One of the units right now, unit T1, is actually offline, and that's because there's been some gassing problems with that unit. It did not look good, so it's been shut off for a while now. That substation itself only serves 12.47 kV load. Two additional substations. We've got the power plant substation, which is right out here. That has one transformer. That's probably your oldest substation transformer on the system. That is a 69 kV to 4160 power transformer with a rating of 10.5 MVA. There's also a bus tie transformer in there, and what that bus tie transformer allows you to do is serve load at both of your primary distribution voltages of 4160 and 12.47 kV. You also have the south substation, which is your newest substation, and that's somewhat the same setup as the power plant, except switched around. So that substation transformer is at 12.47 kV, but the bus tie transformer reduces that voltage so you can still serve both voltages out of that substation. Makes it a little tricky to operate the system, and it was really tricky to study, and we'll get into that a little bit more here. Your distribution system, as I mentioned, you have two primary voltages. 13 circuits are on your 12.47 kV system. That serves about 73% of your entire Princeton load on a peak day. The 4160, you only have 5 circuits, but those still make up 27% of your system. 4160 would be the oldest part of your system. There's a lot of municipal utilities out there that's the voltage they started with. Majority of your system is underground construction type. So what we have here is, this is a snippet, if you will, out of the model that we built of your electric distribution system. So if you can see my laser here, we have the north substation up here, power plant right here, south substation right here. Everything on this map that is red is your 4160 system. Everything that is in blue is your 12.5 system. So you can see where the 4160 has been slowly converted through the years, and 12.5 is mostly the primary voltage in town. The second snippet I'll give you here is the differentiation between overhead and underground. So everything in green on the map is underground, and everything in purple is still overhead. So if you transverse the maps kind of back and forth here, you can see that most of the purple is still your 4160 that's remaining overhead. So when Jeremy and his crews go out and they bury some of the line, they don't bury it at 4160, it gets buried back at 12.47. Let's talk a little bit about generation at the power plant. You've got a mix of 5 diesel-operated, diesel-fired generators there, and the age really ranges. The 4 of the oldest units, you've got the Fairbanks Morse, the Enterprise, the Superior, and another Enterprise at engine number 6. And then you have the newest at engine number 7, which is your Caterpillar unit that was put in 2002. It's also the largest unit. Total generating capacity is approximately 12.1 megawatts, or 12,190 kilowatts. So let's talk a little bit about your historical and future load. So we really have 4 lines up here on the graph, and the blue lines are your winter peak. So that combines the 6 months where we would consider winter. Those are your system peaks during those months. The lines here in red are what we would call your summer peaks. So you can see Princeton is clearly what we would call a summer peaker. And there have been some load variation here through the summer months over the past 10 years, back to 2011. We do show here, let's call your existing load level. We did use your 2021 figures because we were in the middle of the study, and even though we didn't have a complete full year of data, when we were here in June, we knew the load was going to be around the peak around that day we were here. So even though these are showed as projections here in 2021, we actually use those as your current load because they're actual loads. It's just based on the timing of when we got the study done. But that's also discussed in the report. So one of the questions you might ask is, well, why are you showing these big load projections if our load over the past 10 years has been somewhat steady? And the reason for that is the load growth that we show for both the summer and the winter is purely based on your prospective new loads. There are several areas in town that we've identified that could see some growth in the next 10 years, and we'll cover those here in a bit. But what those loads, those future loads translate to is a summer growth rate of 1.73% and a winter growth rate of 2.98%. So when I mentioned that we look at your system both at an existing level and a projected level, these are the two numbers we use for that right here. 13,639 kilowatts for your existing system, 16,189 kilowatts for that 10-year number. So I talked about the areas of growth. Total new load growth here from the table, about 2.5 megawatts or 2,550 kilowatts. All these diagrams and graphs that I'm going through are going to be in the hard copy of your report too. But the three areas we identified for growth after talking with Jeremy and Keith and looking at some city planning measures is we have two smaller residential developments up in this area, up on the north and up on the northeast. The big driver here was a potential industrial park here on the west side. So we assigned approximately 1.5 megawatts of load on that area, just based on our knowledge of potential commercial or industrial entities that could go with. System energy losses. So what energy losses are the difference between how much power you buy from SIMPA versus how much you sell. So that's energy that gets lost or dissipated out on your overhead and underground distribution lines. Your average losses for both your primary systems are around 5.96%. That's about right where we would expect them to be for a system with your makeup. The lower the voltage you get, the higher losses you're going to have because you have to push more current on those cables, and due to the function of the resistive losses, you're going to have more losses. So that's about right where we think it should be. Should the utility decide to convert some of that 4160 to 12.5 or even the rest of the 4160 to 12.5, those will be real dollars that'll be back in your pocket. Certainly not enough to pay for projects or anything like that, but a few $1,000s every year in losses. What was our design criteria when we looked at your existing system and how it was going to perform in the future? First criteria is that we looked at what we call N-1 level of reliability for all of your facilities. So what is that N-1? Well, N stands for normal, and -1 means the loss of any one major piece of equipment. So your system should be able to reliably serve its customers if this transformer up over here gets struck by lightning. Shouldn't have any brownouts in town. Jeremy and his crew shouldn't have to scramble. Shouldn't be a power outage for 3 days. Your system should be able to handle an N-1 event, and that's criteria number 1. Criteria number 2 is tied into that, and that we want to provide ANSI Class A voltage service to all your customers under normal or those emergency N-1 conditions. What that ANSI voltage service is a graph here where an ANSI chart allows you so much voltage drop through your distribution system so that someone's refrigerator works in their house. What we're focused on as part of the study is your primary system here. So that primary system, we're allowed 3.5 volts drop. Now that's not on a 1000 kV scale. That's not measured down to a 120 volt scale. So that 3.5 volt drop number is going to be really important as we go forward here. That's the measure. Anything above that, that could potentially be brownout issues. Anything below that, we're looking pretty good. Design criteria number 3, we don't want to exceed any thermal limits of facilities on the system. What does that mean? That just means that we don't want to burn up any wires on your system. The wires are only rated to carry so much power. We want to make sure we're not trying to push more through it to make it handle. And criteria number 4 is that it's a flexible and easily expandable system. What that means is if you have an outage of a circuit, Jeremy and his guys shouldn't have to go out and throw 30 switches from a 45-page switching order that he has to have an engineer put together. It should be straightforward, shouldn't be confusing, flexible, and also somewhat expandable so that if you have these residential developments, or you have someone want to put in an apartment building or something, you don't have to scramble and completely rebuild your system. You have the facilities that can handle that. Now, there's always the question of, well, what if we get approached by a 40 megawatt Amazon data center or something like that, an Amazon shipping center, Microsoft data center? Those are always a one-off that you have to handle separately, because there's a lot more that goes into that. So if the load would change based on our projections, you'd have to look at doing different things, but we use our engineering judgment to come up with that. Software analysis. So as I mentioned, Jeremy has got a GIS. Princeton has a GIS system of your electric utilities. We were able to take that map, if you will, export it into our model, use some of the existing loads for those peak days, and build a model in our MillSoft windmill distribution system. So here's a snippet, another snippet, if you will, of your existing system. And we're going to step through these and show some different scenarios, mostly the ones that are most impactful, of what your system looks like under certain conditions. So this is your existing system colored by feeder. So you can see you have multiple feeders through your system. I included a legend over here, and this map is in your book as well. North substation up here, power plant, south substation right here, power plant, substation are fairly close together. So this is the first, what I would call, system run that we did for your existing system. So this is the performance of your system intact, so normal condition, with your 2021 loads. Now, anytime we look at these screenshots, red is a voltage drop issue above that 3.5 volts. So it's going to show up red. Black is good. That means it's below that 3.5 volts. And if any green shows up, that's also the cable burning up issue that we talked about. So long story short, if you see red, it's not good. So your existing system here, feeder 6, which is a 4160 feeder, under normal conditions, we can see anywhere up to 9.9 volts of drop out there. So that's a problem.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Are questions appropriate now, or you want to save them for the end?
That's up to you.
I have a personal interest in the red section over there.
Sure.
Does that mean that it's red because they have experienced that 9.9 volt drop in the past, or you see a potential?
It would be potential, because there's some things that Jeremy and his crew can do to alleviate some of that. But really what it comes down to is somewhat of standard planning. I think on that hot day we had this summer, you could go out there and you could probably measure that low voltage. Now, you're probably not at the full 9.9, that's what our model tells us. Because you're not going to get it at that exact instant, right? Your load throughout the day moves up and down, but you're going to be close.
That's also an area that, if I'm not mistaken, you can flip back wherever you want, but I think that's all overhead stuff out there.
Almost all of it. Yep.
And so
Just
that's
a smidge of underground. Correct.
so that kind of plays a part in why you see some potential drops.
Right. So your question is one we get all the time. It's, well, we don't necessarily always see these. Why are you showing it up there? And it really is because we're planning around that peak number. It could be out there, you can miss it, maybe you're not home. Certainly, there's probably some people that have experienced it and maybe just didn't see anything. Certainly, the model shows that we have some issues out in that area. So if we move up to the 2031 loads, you can see we get a little bit more red here in the system, and then we start to get some green out there on feeder 6. Now that's expected on a 4160 system. The 4160 system, the lower the voltage you have, the shorter you can push power. That's why you see the transmission lines that run from state to state across country. Those are at those really high voltages of 345,000 volts, et cetera. So a 4160 system, you just can't push load up that far without having voltage drop issues. So it's really common that we see that. Feeder 6, so they went from 9.9 volts up to 13.4 volts of drop. Loss of the south substations. So This is one of the N-1 scenarios that we went through. So this would be loss of the south substation if your switch gear down there has failed. Plus one under your existing loads. So what I did here is
Andy, I'm sorry, just to clarify, when you say under existing loads, you mean under existing peak load?
existing peak 2021. Yep, right up here. So we threw some of your largest demand customers on this map just to show how they would be impacted. So we've got Walmart, plastics, hospital, Coborns, and both schools up here. A lot of red on that map. And that's just a function of Jeremy's guys not having the system that they need to have to be able to switch to make all that map black. We go to the table here. Feeder 6 is still at that 9.9, but now we're introducing feeder 12 and feeder 23, also above that 3.5 volt drop. We are also starting to, they don't show up in this map because they're substation related, but we're also starting to overload the power plant transformer and the power plant bus tie transformer. That is really not a good thing considering their age. We think we can maybe get up to their full rating on this unit out here, but we would really be rolling the dice based on its age. We'll get into that here in a little bit. So if we move out to the 2031 loads, what does that look like? We're going to get a little bit more red in some of these areas. Voltage drops are going to increase. There's that green on feeder 6 that we talked about. And then the power plant transformers really get overloaded with that load growth. We did a whole bunch of scenarios. They're all included in your books. The ones I wanted to show up here were probably the ones that were most impactful that caught all of our attention. So when we're going through and making our improvements and looking at deficiencies, when we're coming up with solutions, we're going to figure out how to make all of that map black under this condition. The last scenario I wanted to give you is the loss of the 69 kV transmission line coming into town. So that's a radial line, just short of 3 miles. And one of the questions you're probably asking is, well, if that line goes down, it'll probably generate. Absolutely will generate. What we consider a con is long-term, or negative, if you will, is long-term generation. We don't know how long that line's going to be out. You could potentially, if that line takes a week to rebuild, depending on the ice storm, trying to get a crew here, we could be generating for up to a week, and we just don't believe that's feasible. So as we get into some of the improvements here as well, you'll see we had maybe less focus on the generation plant as far as putting in additional generation or trying to make that save this scenario. We focused more on improving the north substation. So the results of this one, the drops are really starting to get up there. The north tie between your north substation and the rest of your system is overloaded by 44%. Overloading the transformer up north that's usable at 37%. And of course, feeder 6, we're seeing 19.2 volts drop out there. So of course, as you would expect, when we go to 2031, see more green, see more red, and some of those overloads get really high to where we'll be ruining it with it. System deficiencies. So I kind of gave you a preview of some of those items that we'll hit here at a high level. There's really 2 major factors that went into this. The first one is the age of equipment useful life. Your major substation equipment, such as a transformer and switchgear, if properly maintained and serviced, you should normally expect to get about 30 to 40 years of life on that. Now, the unit up north, the transformer T1 that has those gassing problems and is offline, that unit was actually rewound in 1998, so it didn't even make it that 30 years. So that's what we're using as our guideline for replacement of that equipment. And then electrical performance, voltage drop, thermal capacity, just those maps we were just looking at. Anything that comes out of that we list as a deficiency. One thing I will note on the system deficiencies is that the 4160 is a problem. And if that voltage doesn't, if that portion of your system never gets converted, it's like you're swimming across the river with a concrete block tied to your ankle. You're just never going to get past what the system needs to be if that 4160 doesn't get converted. Rolling into the system deficiencies here, 69 kV transmission, really don't have any deficiencies, and really not for you to worry about so much because it is owned by other entities. It's performed well in the past. The two entities I spoke with didn't seem to think there were going to be any improvements anytime soon that are needed. So looking good there on the transmission side. On the north substation side, we have 3 pieces of equipment that are either damaged or past their useful life. So transformer T1, 23 years old, offline due to gassing issues. That unit needs to be replaced. Then there's 2 switchgear buses up there. Bus 1 is 56 years old. Bus 2 is 47 years old. So while that equipment may not have failed yet, once you get past that useful life, you always start rolling the dice. Also a challenge with any kind of electrical component, whether that be a component for one of your older generators or even your 2002 CAT generator. Eventually, you're going to struggle to get replacement parts. So if you have a breaker in your switchgear that won't close and you need a new spring, you're just not going to be able to find it. So that's where we come up with that 30 to 40 years. When it comes to your engines, some of our clients, even when they're putting in their new Caterpillars back in the early 2000s, those engines will have very little run hours on them, but as we go and they age, it's just going to be harder to find replacement parts is what it's going to come down to. There's also some fuses that protect transformer T1 that we think need to be replaced with another device to improve potential voltage conditions to your customers. The power plant substation. So this guy right across the road here, 2 items that need to be replaced. The circuit switcher is approximately 38 years old based on my interpretation of the serial number on it. Transformer T1, that unit over there does not have a year anywhere to be found on it. So we estimated it at 38 years old based on the age of the circuit switcher. I think that transformer is a whole lot older just by looking at it. Could be wrong, but just can't find a year on it to formally document how old it is. So the system deficiencies on your distribution system. So we talk about voltage issues during normal and emergency conditions and how they present themselves. So we see issues on your system, the red and the green, based on normal and emergency conditions, and they're anticipated to worsen under load growth. So things aren't going to get any better as Princeton continues to grow on that end. On the loss of South Subs transformer T1 that we showed you, along with that bus 1, we do have voltage deficiencies on multiple circuits, and we have transformer overloads at the power plant. That issue will also continue to get worse as load grows. Loss of the power plant transformer T1, we see issues there. The second bullet item there, system can't handle the loss of the power plant 4160 bus 1. The reason for that is there are no backfeeding capabilities of those circuits. So they go out and they stop, they're not tied anywhere else. When we lose that bus, all those people are out of power. Then we talked a little bit about the loss of the self transmission line and what that looks like. We have some voltage issues there as well. Then those, oops, here, and those are experienced without the voltage issues are experienced without using long-term generation. A little bit more on the distribution system. The way the system was built initially, there's 2 different type of connectors you can use, a 200 amp connector or 600 amp connector. Obviously there's 400 amps of difference, right? So the 200 amp load break connectors, they can essentially clog up your system, so it makes it tougher for Journey to switch under certain conditions without blowing those elbows because we're only rated for 200 amps. We would replace those with some 4-aught circuits, some additional sectionalizing and some circuitry to beef up the system, make it more reliable, make it flexible for Jeremy and his crew so that they can go out and switch and get people back online as quickly as you can. There's a need for some more ties out on your distribution system, and that goes back to the talk about if you lose the bus over here in the power plant, there's no way for Jeremy and his guys to tie stuff together to make it happen. Those people will just be out. So not only do we want to convert that, but we want to make some additional ties out on the system, make it easier for Jeremy. Second one here is the big one, and that is the condition of the 4160 overhead distribution system is really poor to average in general, and it's in need of replacement. Third item, having 2 different distribution voltages in town makes it really difficult to operate. Not only that, because you can't tie the 2 voltages together without a transformer, right? So we may have a circuit out on your system that's 4160 right here, the 12.5 circuit across the street, but you can't tie them together. You also have to carry the additional inventory that comes with another primary voltage. So you can certainly buy dual voltage transformers at additional cost that can be connected at both the 4160 and 12.5 voltage. But all the other fuses, some of the other equipment, you have to carry additional inventory to account. And then, as I mentioned previously, conversion of that 4160 to 12.5 will reduce those system losses, which will result in real cash savings for power plant. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we really only looked at it from a capacity level, and based on capacity and how we are proposing to switch the system, you're going to be fine. You only need to generate that amount of load when you would lose that south transmission feed, and that 12.1 megawatts of generation will be able to carry the load that we have fed out of that substation. We did not look at any scenarios where both transmission lines, both the north feed and the south feed, were out of service at the same time, because we just don't think that's highly likely, and that would be really an N-2 condition. So really, when it comes to a deficiency for the power plant, those older 4 units, they continue to be a concern, specifically the availability of those spare parts, and it's getting harder and harder to find guys like Jim and others that can actually work on those units. It's been a challenge for a lot of my clients. Miscellaneous, just a few things here. We've got a coordination study that should be updated to better protect the system, try and reduce that fuse inventory, make it simpler for Jeremy and his guys. We've got an arc flash study that should be updated based on recent code changes and some other changes throughout the industry that really need to be adopted. And then one of the things we have over here at the power plant is let's call it a digital scoreboard, if you will. I'm sure you guys have seen it, where it just shows the different loads at each substation and how much has been generated. And that system can be a whole lot more. So when there's an outage in town, it'd be nice to have an enhanced SCADA system, which we call supervisory control and data acquisition. That's what SCADA stands for. Having a system like that will be able, Jeremy and his staff will be able to better respond to those outages, know right what's going on, not necessarily on the distribution system, but if there's something going on at the substation level. So, recommended improvements, here we are. Well, why, Andy, are you recommending these improvements? And we want to eliminate those deficiencies. We want to provide solutions. We want to equip your electric system to accommodate that future load growth that we identified over the next 10 years. We want to increase your system reliability so that your customers don't have the potential to see those brownouts after the improvements, and make sure we try and keep their lights on as much as we can, right? That's the ultimate goal of any electric utility. We want to be proactive versus reactive. We don't want to have to scramble to serve that new house that's going to go out on the edge of the system, or a new apartment complex that's going to go somewhere else. few things I want to note here about the improvements themselves. Timing on these improvements is absolutely critical. The reason for that is how complicated the system is. When you're doing 4160 conversions and substation improvements at the same time, you got to make sure it's right so that you have the load flow balance, so that you can take certain pieces of equipment out of the equation without causing issues elsewhere on your system. We would intend to really drill down and nail down that schedule during a preliminary design phase to make sure we're all on the same page. Last item there is what I would call strengthening the north substation versus relying on long-term generation. So we don't know how long the 4 older units at the plant will be around. You know, the big question that could come up is, what if something happened tomorrow during your run? Are you going to spend 6 figures or more to replace that unit or repair that unit? And instead of focusing on that capacity at the power plant, what we wanted to do was, well, what would it take to strengthen the north substation so that the north substation could just feed the entire town if necessary? So that's kind of the approach we took here. So let's get into the dollar component of it here. What I want to note is that these are all third quarter costs. These are contractor facilities. They assume contractor built facilities, and these are also all-in costs. They're third quarter costs based on the timing of when we put the numbers together. Some of you have probably experienced our pricing right now in the electrical market, along with lead times, is very volatile. So we've seen some lead times for substation transformers actually go out to 2 years from date of order. You're not going to get that transformer for 2 years. We've also seen anywhere up to 15% cost increases for materials. So something we need to keep an eye on. Could be demand based, could be inflation based, could be a combination of both. Hopefully we'll get through that here in the next year or so as the country continues to reopen. As such, I wanted to point out that under this engineering and contingencies number, for each of these units, there's a pretty healthy contingency number. If we wanted to cover some of those cost increases where we could. But as we get into the preliminary design for these projects, we're going to go back and update all of those cost estimates for the project we're working on based on the current prices that we have. So phase 1 improvement items. So first item on the list there is conversion of 4160 feeders 6 and 7 from overhead to underground and also to 12.47 kV. We have that numbered around 2.5 million. We also want to strengthen that tie up to the north substation. So we would reconductor that existing circuit on $450,000. Then once you add in the engineering and contingencies for the distribution improvements portion of phase 1, looking around 3.8 million. Well, which areas are feeders 6 and 7? You're probably wondering. That's right here in the red cloud. So if you remember our maps, some of the 4160 overhead, everything here in the red will kind of be reconfigured, converted to underground. Where we can, we'll also make some miscellaneous circuit ties as we go by to enhance reliability in the system. Miscellaneous system improvements included is phase 1. We're going to get there in a little bit, but if I'm in your shoes, everybody's going to ask, Andy, how in the world do we pay for this? Electric retail rate study is going to help paint that picture for you. So we've got the rate study, the coordination study update, and the arc flash study update. We get to $66,000 there. So again, these are all kind of budgetary numbers when it comes to the study level. We get down to phase 1, total for phase 1, when we combine the distribution improvements and the miscellaneous items, we're looking at about 3.9 million. We would anticipate starting design on phase 1 improvements in 2022, carry that through 2024. We're going to go through 3 phases here, and essentially each of them we have identified through 3 years. Phase 2 improvements, we change our focus and go up to the north substation. and do some improvements there. We look at the, got a circuit switcher here for 81,000. Power transformer, strengthening that guy, so we're putting a bigger unit up there than we probably need because we want to be able to carry the rest of the town. 1.1 million, replacing those two older buses of switch gear, 490,000, and then we have our construction and engineering contingencies tasks, which total right around 1.2 million in that, 1.1 actually. North substation improvements around 2.7 million for the work up there. That's just shown here as a one-line diagram. The green is the work we would do as part of that project, again, included in your book. The distribution improvements portion of this, we would continue to convert the 4160 that I mentioned is really the basis for a lot of the issues you have on your system. So we'll convert feeder 9 and feeder 24, make some miscellaneous circuit ties, and that comes in our cost estimate around 2.3 million. Where are those areas? Those areas are here in green. So we've got feeder 9 up here in the green cloud and feeder 24 down here, also in the green cloud. These squares here are some miscellaneous circuit ties, typical of 7 that we have throughout the system. Put those all together in phase 2 from 2024 to 2027, looking at around 5.1 million for that. When we go to phase 3, because of the timing, one of the questions I would ask is, if we think that's the oldest substation, why aren't we going there first? And the reason we're not going there first is because we have to convert the 4160 first. We just don't have the ties out there to be able to take that transformer out and do some additional work. So phase 3, we're going to go over and work on that power plant substation, update the equipment that we talked about, put a new transformer in there. You'll notice we're not replacing it with a transformer that has a low side of 4160. This new transformer will be connected in at the 12.47 kV voltage level. Around 1.8 million for phase 3 for the power plant substation improvements. And again, this is just a one-line diagram where the connection used to be here to your 4160, and we're going to make the connection here over to your 12.5. These are really high ballpark costs for the SCADA system because we just haven't dug into the actual details yet. We would do a preliminary design. But to put in an enhanced SCADA system and develop that, and some ballpark costs were around $750,000 there. I'm hopeful we could come in less than that, but I just don't know all the ins and outs of your communication paths, etc. So we'd have to take a peek at that. Overall, for phase 3, once we put in the power plant sub and SCADA system for 2027 and 2030, around $2.6 million. So if we summarize it for the 10-year outlook, phase 1 through 22 through 24, about 3.9 million. Phase 2 through 24 through 27, 5.1 million. Phase 3, 27 to 30, 2.6 million. Total overall third quarter costs of $11.6 million over the course of the next 10 years. We're almost to the end here, but as I mentioned, if I were in your shoes, well, how do we pay for it? We got to find funds for this. Do we bond for it? Are we able to take out of our cash revenues? Interest rates right now are historically low. Is this the right time to bond for it? How long a bond payment are we looking at? What's our debt service coverage? We would look and do some initial financial planning as part of an electric rate study. And 3 of the highlights there, we're going to establish your revenue requirements. So how much money does the utility need to take in to pay for these projects and everything else that you do on a day-to-day basis? You'd coordinate with your financial advisors and bonding agent to see what that credit rating looks like, see what the interest rate scenario looks like, when would be the best time to sell those bonds. Then obviously we want to determine the impact of rates. What's that going to do to your rates? So our recommended next steps here are to authorize us to begin some preliminary efforts on phase 1. And those would be preliminary design for the 4160 conversion, which we call the distribution improvements. So those would be circuit diagrams, project schedules, update the cost estimates. Then I actually put together at the project management level a cash flow that your financial advisors use as part of the project to look at the bonding portion of it. It also goes to the person in our office, Blair Metzger, who do the rate study. Coordination and art class studies are phase one. And so is the electric rate study. We included that under phase one. We've got the budget in there. Again, impacts to the rates, coordinating with your financial advisors and making addition. Having a great team with municipal experience is critical. As I mentioned, Keith, Jeremy, the rest of the staff have been great to work with. We do this work all the time for a lot of SIPA members as well. St. Peter's, your Redwood Falls, your Prestons, Spring Valley, Minnesota. Keep the team together. We've got the rate study team, the design team, and the bonding agent. We use our experience to make sure that these projects are successful. One option for us is after you have some time to digest, we can bring back some task orders. And that would be just some agreements for us to take the next steps. We can do that at your January meeting earlier after you've had a chance to digest. The beauty about a project like this is you as a commission don't have to decide, yes, we're going to do it, and then it's just all going to happen. There's always certain points in the project where whether it's authorizing us to go out for bids or accepting bids, or if we need to call an audible and go a different direction, always going to have that opportunity. So it's not like we would come back in January and we would say, yep, go spend the 11 million, figure it out later. That's not how these projects work, as I'm sure you know. So I'm through with it. All 54 slides, I believe. So thank you for your time today. More than happy to take any questions you have.
Have you done a study like this before here? Is this your company?
Princeton?
Yeah.
No, sir. You want to talk about the history of that at all? There was a couple, there were some studies done, nothing was thrown at this. Is that fair?
Correct. We did have a fuse coordination study done 4 years ago.
We're 16, 2017, 15,
Yeah.
16, yeah.
It's,
Mediocre.
yeah.
So I guess where I was going with that is the probability and outcome of the last study. Meaning, what was advised? Did we listen? Did we follow through? Did we take these steps? And where are we compared to that today?
That last study was just a fuse coordination study.
Okay.
Was just to get the fusing to work properly. To get it so when a fuse would blow, it was supposed to blow in the proper place.
Yeah.
And yes,
So update the antiquated system into something that's at least feasible.
well, that we never had before.
Right.
It was just, we think it should be this, or it was.
Yeah.
Basically, well, that's what was in there before. So that's what we put back in there. There was no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah.
The last study.
So
was
let
done.
me maybe rephrase the question. When you do this and you cited that you've done this for 18 years,
Mhm.
and I'm not questioning you or your company at all.
Sure.
I'm asking the question with probability and outcome being the focus, what are typically the results of these type of studies for different cities? Is the goal obtainable? Is it reached? And what percentage is that? I know there's a lot of variables, like you said, you could stop, you can go full bore, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
But
So if you're asking me, if I can boil it down, how successful are we with our other clients on seeing these projects through to the very end of the 10 years with a successful project? greater than 99% because nothing's 100%. I personally have taken a lot of municipal utilities through these 10-year projects over the course of my 18-year career. Several clients in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa, where the beauty of this study is you have a plan and you just work the plan now. We've done all the thinking behind it, right? Well, why are we doing this? Well, we already looked at that. Yep, now we just got to build it. So the probability of a successful outcome was extremely high. Right.
It's nice to have those percentages in our favor.
The hard part is look at all the numbers and say, okay, now, should we do this? How big a bite, how big a bite are we gonna take? We'll do phase one and then rethink phase two. Let's plan on phase one and phase two and then hold off on phase three until we can rethink or refinance, or there's a lot of moving, there's a lot of balls in the air. And it's obvious to me, who has an engineering degree at marbles and crayons, that there's a lot of stuff here that I don't understand, but it certainly appears to me there are areas that we need some help, because we know from some of the stuff you showed us, but also from our own communications with Keith and the guys here, that we hit a peak this past summer that if we were on our own, we wouldn't have been able to sustain. Fortunately, we have great partners. We have GRE and SIMPA are there to back us up. And we don't have to count on number 7, even though Jim does a good job of keeping that going pretty quick over there. We don't have to count on that to survive and keep our customers afloat. It's not, I think our residential customers are the biggest chunk of what we have, but we have some good commercial customers that are keeping people working and keeping this community alive, that we want to make sure that those things are never shorted. When you start talking about big voltages, and you're talking about people like plastic products, for example, and not to single them out because we have a couple of hospitals use a lot of electricity. They charge me for that. Anyway, the point is there's a lot of stuff to think about here, but I appreciate Mr. Sports' questions. If we start down this path, what kind of reassurance do we have that we're going to be successful?
I'm not part of the utilities, I'm actually from the city, but are you seeing I'm worried about dollars.
Really?
As we all should be. Are you seeing anything in the infrastructure bill that would be an opportunity to help fund these? I mean, I know that there's lots of paperwork at the federal level that has to happen, but I mean, are there monies earmarked?
That's a fantastic question. So if I could just take one step back, when it comes to electric utility improvements, generally in every case, the electric utility is considered the golden egg, right? The golden goose. They're given the money to whether it be a city or a utility, they're generating the most revenue. So when it comes to additional funding that you can get at the state level or other grants out there that are available for your water and wastewater projects, they're not out there on the electrical side. However, with that infrastructure bill, we are working with MMUA and several of the other, I'll call them supplemental power providers in the simple realm, if you will, on what that bill looks like. There's still some appropriations that have to happen at the state level. And the last I had heard on that is we're probably a year or two off before that really gets rolling. But that's certainly something that we need to keep an eye on. That would be available. I've got actually the bill in my office. It's over, I think it's 1,039 pages. I kind of picked some highlights of it. There's some stuff in there that makes me think that Some of the bill was pointed to some of the larger utilities because they mentioned wildfire a lot, which to me screams California. They're trying to get a lot of the dollars pushed that way, right or wrong. I believe there's also some language in there that the grant amount, don't quote me on this, but I believe the grant amount can only be a maximum of what the utility has spent to fix or improve reliability over the past 3 years. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, so I could be interpreting that differently. That'll make it challenging for some clients that are at the doorstep of doing a big project like you are, versus some of our other clients who have gone through this and are really coming out of it over the last 3 years. So we'll see where that goes. There's a lot of wheels in motion on that. That's a great question.
Well, to that point, the last PPU annual meeting, they have people that are looking specifically at that bill to see how we could capture some of those funds to upgrade our systems, because we're not alone. I mean, Princeton is one little utility in Minnesota, but there's a bunch of other little utilities that I'm pretty sure are in the same boat, if not more dire situations than ours. And so when I look at 11.6, was it? That's not exactly chump change. So we have to be thoughtful. We have a board of commissioners here that like to be careful. So there's a lot of thinking that has to go into this, but at the same token, we have the responsibility to take good care of this community. So there will be more conversations about this.
If I can add 2 things. When it comes to those grant dollars, there is likely a matching provision where Princeton will have to kick in a certain amount regardless of what those grant funds are. They do prefer, it's been my experience in working through some of these grant processes that they do prefer shovel-ready projects. So if you've got a project that's ready for bid, not necessarily almost done with design, you may not get the grant dollars for the engineering portion. On the construction material side, they get it that way. But I know there's a lot of concern about how you pay for it, right? And that's really the rate study is going to answer all those questions. Because that's why I close with that slide, because every utility that I work for, when I make these presentations, that's a question everybody has, and it's a deserving question that needs to be answered. So that rate study, what Blair Metzger in our office does is he'll look at those requirements over the next 10 years. And he will have a document that will summarize in front of you. Yes, we can pay for these projects. Here's what your rates look like, what the impact will be. Here's maybe a different scenario if we stagger things out differently, something like that. So they're all questions that can certainly be answered. So I don't want to leave you hanging like you're, well, how do we pay for this? We can answer that.
Somebody else has that answer, but that answer exists.
It does.
And, Minnesota just announced they had a $7 billion surplus for 2022, 2023. So we'll just ask Mr. Walsh to cut us a check or something. But anyway, so yeah, a lot of consideration has to go into this, but there's some things that need to be done. So appreciate your time.
Sure. You have a question?
If I could say something, when you said where's the probability that once we start this, we're gonna finish? Problem being is like with the north sub or even the sub here across the road. You're going to do it. That transformer is late 60s and it was not rebuilt. So you're looking at 60-year-old transformers. The north sub, one of them is already, in my book, dead. And the other one was not rewound. It's 70s or something. I went to Georgia Transformer and they checked the records. Neither one of them were any of them.
Yeah, The documentation we pulled out of both of those north sub units said they were both rewound, but maybe it's bad paperwork. I don't know.
I don't know, when I
Yep.
called Jordan, he sent me the information and forwarded it on from whoever's working down there now, I can't remember his name.
I think they were, at the time they were rewound, they were called US
It was
Transformer.
US
East.
Transformer.
Yeah.
It was Jordan, US
One of
Transformer.
those books for me.
Yep.
One of
But
those books for me.
the work is gonna be tough. Whether you wanna be in the driver's seat or you wanna be chasing the car. So that substation across the lake blows up, we're gonna be chasing the car no matter what. So the one up north blows up, you're reactive instead of proactive. It's the idea of getting ahead of it. So you're driving the car instead of the car driving. The work, for the most part, is going to have to be done. Maybe not, it's common sense to get rid of the overhead and put it underground and increases your reliability. And they've been doing it for years. Can you stop and leave the overhead? Yes, but those problems that he addressed are gonna rear their ugly head. They will rear their ugly head.
I don't disagree with you, Jim, at all. In fact, one of the questions that I have in my head here is not for us to say yes or no, because it is a big study, but one of those questions is to go to someone like yourself and your team to be able to say, what do you guys think? And you just answered that.
Well, I've been,
I know,
this one over here
but
since I
that's,
started working.
that's
So I get the
why,
money to buy a new transformer.
that's why I value the opinion that you have and take that very
I mean,
serious.
Whether you go with DGR, since we've already done all the legwork, or you say, oh, let's try somebody else. Irregardless, the work is gonna be done eventually.
Yeah.
The system is gonna force it on you.
Yeah. I don't think there's any, at least in my mind, I don't think there's any question that we have to do something. And we can't take it just project one. I think we have to have the foresight to look at 1, 2, 3 in a package, because then the plan is set for 10 years. That's my opinion. And that if it's my company, that's what I would be doing. I wouldn't do one and then say, well, let's see if we need to. No, we need 2 and 3 now. Now, the question I was going to ask is, with the growth plate that we're currently in at the beginning of some bubbles here with population, businesses, et cetera. If that all comes to play before we can do anything, and we start lighting up lines because of the demand, I mean, how do we handle that, Jeremy? I mean, you see the building and everything in the plants that's going on. It's happening now. And I don't think our infrastructure that we currently have is going to be able to happen fast enough for all the reasons that have been mentioned. Money, the time it takes, the red tape it takes. That's my concern right now.
I think, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of it is dependent upon where on the system it occurs. With his voltage drop concerns on feeder 6, obviously out there we're more limited. But if we take the Princeton Business Park as an example, which was all black, that would seem to indicate to me that in the short term, we're okay. The recommendations that they're putting together is to make sure that in the long term, we continue to remain okay. So I think part of it has to do with location as to how that
And
impacts
it's
voltages.
it's what and where.
Yeah,
It really is. I mean, yeah, at the industrial park, if Microsoft comes in and wants to put a huge data center in there, it's not going to be black anymore. You know what I mean? And then it's going to be a phone call to DGR and say, hey, guess what? It's not 1.5, it's 8. You know, and that's just the situation we're going to have to handle, you know, in some of the areas.
I think our plan, I mean, the reason we're,
Some of it's going to have to come, it's really going to have to come down to the rate study. And if what it all comes down to.
but I do think too, part of it is we're dealing with such a large system that an extra customer here, extra customer there is not gonna make a big deal. It's just, it's in the aggregate as you go longer and longer and you add more and more. The reason we wanted to start on this stuff now was so that we have the time. And if one customer comes in the business park or 3 come in, I don't anticipate that being an immediate problem. But, you know, if the city keeps going, you know, if they annex more property or we have other larger customers coming in to our existing footprint, just over time, it will become unmanageable. And that's why we want to plan it.
Andy, could you, and just pause Keith,
Yeah.
because I want to continue that, but if we get that slide up that showed the red boxes that are currently potentials or are happening, this thing was towards the beginning. And I don't know if you have one showing those boxes and what zones those are in, if they're red, green, or black.
That was way.
I think, yeah, okay, so you have the number of apartments, is that the bottom left?
Bottom left is the Princeton Business Park,
Is the what?
the business park.
Yes.
It's just.
No, the apartment buildings, I called them on and they said those would be fine. The 2 that are out right here on
Yeah.
Front Street. Yep, no, I had called them and said, hey, we're putting 2 500s in here. Just so they could get them in, because they come in during the study. I said, we're putting in 2 500s. Make sure you add them in.
So they're cognizant, so those.
Yeah,
those
so
okay,
the two apartment buildings are included in this data.
So with this presentation, they're included. And
Yep.
then, so with everyone being somewhat progressive to grow Princeton, city, us, everybody. If that fills up relatively soon, let's just assume, what is there, 10 spots out there? Depending upon the customer.
Yeah.
And if 4 or 5 are currently looking, but waiting to get the go from us and everybody else. Does that itself, is that in the black area? Currently,
You mean, yeah, under the low, under the current,
right,
that was in the black.
so that could go in and not be an issue.
Well,
Under system intact.
yeah,
Remember, typical utility planning is that N-1. So you want to be able to serve that industrial park if you have an issue elsewhere on the system. So yes, there's red there. That's why the 10-year plan turns that red and black for that level.
Which means we can serve it as long as we don't have the -1.
as long as all the equipment keeps operating.
There's no way I would say, no, we can't serve it, but we need to make the improvements to continue to increase your reliability. If it's a go no go decision, you certainly won't turn that.
I'm just looking at with different times than what we were, say, 2 years ago, good or bad. That all of a sudden, if the 4 that may be interested, all of a sudden that happens and 2 or 3 more want to be in that same area because of whatever reason, transportation, you know, in and out, however, whatever. If it grows that fast and interest rates are low, we'll take advantage of that versus going up and now they missed the boat. If that happens quickly, are we able to adjust, or if the 416 is number 1, does the attention change to a different area because of the dynamics have changed to what the needs and wants are?
If that load would grow significantly over the 1.5 megawatts we planned, we would want to reevaluate.
Yeah, but the 1.5 megawatts assumes full subscription out there. Assumes all the lots are filled, because you base that off of the
Yeah,
acreage.
I mean, it's a
So it's
number.
full occupancy?
Yeah.
Okay. all right.
It's a number, but I mean, we could put in a whole bunch of electrical load in here, a bunch of servers and have a 5 megawatt. load.
Yeah,
gonna
it's an average based on an industrial park.
Acreage.
Lots.
Realistic numbers.
Right, so,
Okay.
you know, so many square feet equals so many
Got
KW, you know, so yeah, that is assuming that 1.5 is assuming that industrial park is full.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes me feel better.
Our best estimate using
Good point.
engineering judgment.
Okay, and then go back to the red squares, please, Andy. Okay, the one in the north was identified as what?
That was just it was identified as, there were some talk about some residential.
Okay,
That's the top one, and then the one in the northeast was another residential, what if? So we just wanted to put those in there as a kind of an option,
Yeah.
just so that if it did
sure,
happen.
no, and that's great planning.
I think that one to the north is that field east of the Bethel Church,
And those are smaller loads.
north of
200
Northfield
kilowatts
Commons.
up north, 100 over here. We also did apply 750 kilowatts of growth across your system.
Okay,
So if someone wants to put on an extension in their house or something, or new equipment, it just gets
Yep.
typically utility.
so, and that's wise too. Do we know, the referendum failed with the school addition and whatnot, but was there any kind of electrical load identified? If that did go through, what that would have been?
I don't think we did. We didn't have the scenario there for you. No, we didn't have anything in there.
Because that may happen someday within this time frame that we're talking about.
Yeah, but like Andy was mentioning, the system-wide growth number assumes, gives you some buffer.
Okay,
We do typically recommend in the recommendations and conclusions is that it's really 10 years is too long to wait to do another study. We really do encourage our clients to do updates every 3 to 5 years to capture things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, we have these loads out here that came up we weren't aware about. Well, let's see if we need to call an audible and go down this road instead of that.
thank you.
I didn't mean to imply that we should do one and then wait and see for number two. But I think part of the process has to be, okay, we need to start one, and then here's number two has to fit in, and number three has to fit in. But we need to think about all of them. Just think about them in chunks. At least in my mind, I'm sure Dan would concur. Any other
Is Dan
questions?
still on?
Yeah, Dan, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Did you have any questions or any thoughts you wanted to share?
The only one I had is outlets, so. Outlets, I don't have any questions, you know, it's something I want, you know, we should look over and digest, you know. It was a good start.
There are no other further questions. I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay,
it's,
I'll make that motion.
Motion has been made to adjourn. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion is carried. Thank you.